The global trend of the new 26 is the constant humiliation of Putin. A whole slew of moral slaps was delivered to the Russian dictator as a New Year's gift. The Kremlin pack barely had time to swallow and digest the operation involving the arrest. Maduro, like his American comrades, inspired by the spirit of anchorage, began seizing Russian ships in neutral waters.
I completely understand that many people feel hurt and insulted, and I absolutely share those feelings. Because when, these elderly Winnie the Poohs tell you one thing, but in reality it turns out to be something else, of course anyone would feel offended. Honestly, it's true. But on the other hand, tell me, is this really the first time these elderly Winnie the Poohs have lied to you? I mean, before this, never, right? So, weren't they the ones telling you that Ukraine is full of pro-Russian people, that they're all Orthodox, and that they dream about it day and night? How many years have they been saying that?
The Americans started aggressively hunting down the shadowy swamp fleet that, out of habit, was exporting sanctioned oil here. But that operation got shut down. The most notable event was the story of the arrest of the Mariner tanker. This rusty tub spent 2 weeks trying to evade the pursuit of the U.S. Coast Guard.
We see that the United States authorities boldly and aggressively took control of the tanker, which at the very last moment turned out to be flying the Russian flag. Russia is now being cut off from yet another significant international stream of money, and that represents the first major development in this situation. Second, Russia is being humiliated in front of the whole world. In
the Kremlin, they started squirming nervously on their rubber seats because of this. Apparently, the ship was transporting something much more interesting than just oil. To avoid being seized, the crew of the vessel raised the Russian flag, and the Kremlin quickly, retroactively declared the ship its own, with Sochi as its home port. The calculation was that the Americans wouldn't dare attack the property of a great and mighty empire. And that was Putin's main mistake. The root of his total and one of his most painful humiliations. Washington ignored the tricolor rag and continued the pursuit.
As for the Russian marinera, the White House states that the tanker raised the Russian flag to circumvent American sanctions.
This morning, after a chase, the vessel was detained in the North Atlantic. It was a vessel from the Venezuelan Shadow Fleet transporting oil subject to sanctions, and the U.S., under the current president, does not intend to tolerate this. A court order was issued for the arrest of the vessel, which also applies to the crew. This means the crew can now be held accountable for any applicable violations of federal law. If necessary, they will be brought to the United States for prosecution.
Wait, you could actually do that? And
at that moment, Pelpiña made his second fatal mistake. He sent his combat fleet to guard the tanker, which included an entire nuclear submarine. Putin was sure that at the sight of such an armada, reeking of traditional values for 1,000 miles, the Yankees would immediately reach for their diapers and retreat in terror. No. But right in front of the Russian combat fleet, the Americans boarded the ship and seized it. At that point, the rubber butt in the Kremlin completely deflated, and the periscope of the nuclear submarine lost its firmness and resilience.
I think they have no idea what to do with the tankers. And they're terrified? Really, just terrified. And today in the news, it was reported that they were just watching. From that submarine and the escort ship, watching the tanker being seized looked like a kind of porn called cuckoldry. And this was in the British press today.
It's as if Washington was deliberately waiting for the Russian ships to arrive just to publicly humiliate Russia.
Hey you, get up. Is this the end for you? Prepare the hooks.
All hands on deck, prepare yourselves for the assault. Secure the grappling hooks and begin the boarding process immediately. Move with speed and precision as we take control of their ship right now.
2 tons of cocaine in packages with a logo. United Russia was seized in Belgium. Such a shipment arrived at the port of Ghent from Brazil. The drugs were packed into 1,900 packages, each bearing a bear and a tricolor. The entire batch was worth about 100 million euros. The police destroyed it.
almost 400 kilograms of cocaine were stored on the grounds of the Russian embassy in Buenos Aires. By the way, that's about $50 million at the time. Now that's interesting.
To be perfectly honest, there is absolutely nothing here.
Funny about it, that is a massive shipment of 400 kilograms of pure cocaine.
Cocaine.
After the maritime bullying, Putin disappeared from the radar. Basically, as always in a difficult situation, the great geostrategist crawls under the baseboard and keeps out of sight. The only time he could be seen was at the Christmas service, where he bravely rushed to pick up a Christmas ornament. Not necessarily. It's not certain that it wasn't a stand-in, and it's not certain that it was the real Putin. Although the expression on his face spoke of a deeply troubled state of mind.
As I have already said, today services are being held in thousands of churches. And now we see our president, Vladimir Vladimirovich.
He is also currently present in one of the local historic churches here. He is devoutly praying and joyfully celebrating the sacred feast of the Nativity of Christ.
Now compare Putin's mood to Trump's mood. In response to the seizure of a sovereign Russian vessel in neutral waters, the Russian Foreign Ministry issued a weak expression of concern. Meanwhile, the ultra-patriots and Z supporters put on a fireworks show with their rear ends. It was a real hysteria, and by then no one was hiding their irritation with Putin personally, calling him a weakling.
They're laughing at our air defense in Venezuela, at our heroic paratroopers near Kyiv. They say this is how special operations should be conducted. Soon they'll be saying we need a new president. Someone strong like that other guy.
It's a very complicated situation. It's clear why. Now Trump has completely shattered the image of the world's second army, the second military power. Before our eyes, we're suffering a very strong psychomoral and psychological blow, and a geopolitical one as well, unfortunately. We're about to experience a second great devastation. The first was the collapse of the Soviet Union. Tens of thousands of enterprises perished there, worth trillions of dollars. The damage now is less, but the war has burned through enormous resources that had been accumulated since 2000.
A blow to the dictator's image. And to all of Russia was so strong that even Kremlin propaganda didn't try to whitewash the leader, but simply acknowledged Russia's failure and helplessness.
As deeply discouraging as it may be, this is no reason to doubt our own abilities. Within the hearts of our people, and throughout the entirety of our state, because more often than not, doubts of this specific kind culminated during the years of 1790, in that very first year.
Moscow was unable to respond to Washington in any way over the arrest of its ally and the seizure of its own ships. It simply wiped its nose in silence. That's why the Americans continued to seize riverboats, and the Ukrainians kept hunting them with drones. By the way,
this is not the only vessel that has been seized in the past 24 hours.
The US also detained the tanker Sophia, this time in international waters of the Caribbean Sea.
Sophia is also under sanctions, but it does not belong to any particular country.
The oil tanker Elbus, flying the flag of Palau, was damaged in the Black Sea near the Turkish coast after being hit by a drone. The incident was reported by the publication Haberturk. The damage was recorded in the upper part of the vessel.
And how, against the backdrop of the Venezuelan and tanker incidents, can we not recall other top humiliations of Putin? Over the course of the war, there have been enough of them to make an entire series. And all of Putin's humiliations happen mainly because, to use the language of the St. Petersburg backstreets, he doesn't stand by his word. Putin's Russia is a country of cheap show-offs, an inflated bubble that's empty inside. For many years, Putin convinced everyone that he was the world's top alpha male, and his army is just a bit better than the second best. Many believed this until Turkey shot down a Russian plane in Syria.
He called the shooting down of the Russian plane over Syrian airspace a stab in the back by terrorist accomplices. This was said by Russian President Vladimir Putin while in Sochi. He emphasized that after the incident, the Turkish side immediately turned not to Russia, but to its NATO partners. This fact apparently caused particular outrage in Vladimir Putin. Quote, as if we shot down a Turkish plane, not them ours.
Meanwhile, Ankara is not going to apologize to Moscow for the downed Su-24. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stated that he called Putin immediately after the incident. but the head of Russia did not speak with him.
Yes, you are absolutely right.
All that the great conqueror could do in response to the Turks was to impose a ban on tomato imports. Erdogan literally wiped his feet on Putin by launching a military attack on the Russian army. And Putin imposed tomato sanctions.
Today's loss is connected to the blow dealt to us from behind by the accomplices of terrorists.
Moscow punishes Turkey with sanctions and bans the import of Turkish agricultural products.
Well, what do you expect if the Russian people invent Ivan the Fool as the hero of their fairy tales?
Then the matter was hushed up and tomatoes started being imported again. Putin came to his senses and started shouting that he would ensure the security of Assad's regime in Syria. Russia has come to Syria forever, and no one will be able to defeat her.
We will never forget the victims and losses we have suffered in the fight against terror, both here in Syria and at home in Russia. But this will not make us fold our hands and retreat.
Of course, of course, of course.
The rebels, under Turkey's wing, carried out a military operation and took Damascus. And Russian troops and bases surrounded Damascus. As a result, Moscow had to beg both Turkey and the new Syrian leadership to spare them and let them go home.
Isn't this some kind of disgrace?
It was indeed a disgrace when Russia fled from Syria to the jeers and curses of the local population. Then Putin faced the Caucasus disgrace. First, Moscow abandoned its ally Armenia, which suffered a crushing defeat in the war for Karabakh. And second, Putin was personally humiliated by the president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev. Russia shot down an Azerbaijani passenger plane and, as usual, pretended nothing happened. It wasn't us, it fell on its own, and anyway, Great Russia never admits mistakes and never apologizes.
One of the things that upset and surprised us was that the official Russian authorities put forward theories about an explosion. Some kind of gas cylinder, for example. In other words, it was clear that the Russian side wanted to cover up the issue. And of course, that does no one any credit. Unfortunately, for the first 3 days we heard nothing from Russia, except for these absurd theories.
As you might have guessed, in the end, Putin did admit to the crime and apologized. So, in other words, little Azerbaijan managed to make Russia back down. The authority of the pale dust began to evaporate like alcohol in the blood. Medvedev's.
The whole country is like one big psychiatric clinic. Right now, there is probably not a single person in Russia who isn't suffering from some form of depression. Most likely, only a small number of people remain mentally healthy. These are the people who think clearly, who understand everything, and who protect their mental health by withdrawing into internal emigration.
But the undisputed leader and champion in humiliating Putin and his pseudo-country is, of course, Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Ukraine has destroyed all the myths and scare stories about Russia. That it is not a fearsome northern bear, but a vile, mangy mutt that inherited a nuclear bomb and a superiority complex.
What have the Russian people done to deserve such mockery from you, Vladimir Vladimirovich? What have the poor elderly mothers done, those who are waiting for their sons to return from the war? What? And who are you after all this, Vladimir Vladimirovich? Of reproductive age. Vladimir Vladimirovich answered the people, why? Why did you betray Russia?
The way Ukrainians humiliated Russia will go down in all the world's textbooks. Operation Web for the destruction of strategic aviation. The destruction of Russia's Black Sea Fleet and its expulsion from Crimea. Just think about it. The fleet of a nuclear country is hiding from Ukraine at distant bases, and it's afraid to leave the harbor even though they're getting hit there too.
Ukrainian underwater drones Sea Baby disabled a Russian Varshavyanka-class submarine in the port of Novorossiysk. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, although it denied this, was forced to admit the fact of the attack. There were 4 Caliber cruise missile launchers on board the submarine.
And then there are the long-range Ukrainian strikes deep into Russia and the wiping out of its oil refining capacities.
Ukrainian forces, including with Western missiles, have destroyed key Russian assets. The Novoshakhtinsk oil refinery has been completely demolished, and the port of Temryuk has also been blown up.
Well done.
The very existence of Ukraine is already a humiliation for Putin and his gang. They couldn't take Kyiv in 3 days, and they couldn't even take Sloviansk in 4 years. Russia is exhausted and demoralized. The year 2026 will undoubtedly bring even more humiliation to the Kremlin old man and his entire regime. I want to remind you that this video was created for entertainment purposes and contains elements of satire and irony. All facts and events are presented in a hyperbolic or exaggerated manner to convey a comedic or dramatic effect. We do not aim to mislead but simply focus on humor. Please take this with a smile.